Once again, shout out to everybody joining us and being on time. We got folks from all over New York City, from all up and down the East Coast. Amazing.
I'm the person from Little Rock.
I know. I thought about that.
That was me. I mean, it could be someone else from Little Rock, but I wrote I'm from Little Rock, so that was me shouting out my hometown. Where my Little Rock people at?
Okay. They're in there. So fellas, we're gonna get started. Once Jim, figures out the situation, he'll just jump right back in with us. Sound good?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna do the introduction one last time, and we're gonna rock out. Once again, thank you for joining us. My name is Jason Acosta, podcast producer of Live from the Bronx, podcast that celebrates Bronx creatives and change makers, really trying to shift the narrative. Today we are joined by some amazing folks, and I will tell you a little bit about who they are, and then we're gonna pass it over to them so that they can really get have a chance to talk about themselves, and you can really get to know them. So first, we have Jordan Stockdale joining us. So Jordan Stockdale is the executive director of the Young Men's Initiative at the New York City Mayor's Office. In his role, he oversees YMI's investments and initiatives across education, health, criminal justice, and workforce development. Jordan is a former Harlem special education teacher and Fulbright scholar. In 2017, Jordan launched Hire Harlem, a platform that promotes businesses that hire locally, reinvest in the community, or are owned by people of color. Shout out to Jordan for joining us. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you.
We also have Alvin here joining us today. Alvin Irby is an educator, a comedian, and an author. He's also the founder and chief reading inspirer at Barbershop Books, a literacy nonprofit that creates child-friendly reading spaces in Black barbershops across the U.S. Alvin, what's happening, brother? How you feeling?
I'm great, man. I'm great. Glad to be here.
Amazing. And I'll take a second to just also introduce Jim, even though he's not with us at the current moment, but we're going to figure out technology. He's going to get back with us. So Jim Saint-Germain is the co-founder of Plot. Jim has started out his college career with Borough Manhattan Community College. He is an author. He is a film director. He's a nonprofit leader. He's done amazing work. And Jim will be joining us as soon as we figure out technology. But without further ado, I want to turn it over to the panelists. Jordan, can you tell us more about who you are? I know I read your titles, but what does that mean, and how do you really identify?
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, directing the Young Men's Initiative, which is a mayoral office that funds and co-manages a host of initiatives across criminal justice, workforce development, education, and we have one health initiative. I'm from Kansas City. I moved here in 2010, originally to teach in Harlem, in East Harlem. And so that was an amazing experience. I lived 7 blocks from my school, so I was a real part of the community. And then I moved over to West Harlem, where I am now. And so criminal justice reform is a big passion of mine, ensuring that people have jobs, that they can receive the skills to get jobs, making sure that people who are formerly incarcerated have access to employment and access to social mobility, super important. And then that's how I identify as a Black man or as Black mixed.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Alvin, who are you?
You start with the deep questions. I mean, I do a lot of different things, have a lot of different passions. But I would say that I certainly identify as an educator, whether I'm doing stand-up comedy or I'm giving keynotes or leading workshops. I think one of the things that inspires me and continues to motivate me is the opportunity to help people learn and to help make learning experiences, just more relevant and engaging for everybody. I also moved to New York City to become a teacher. I taught kindergarten, first grade, fourth grade, and was an education director at the Boys Club of New York. So, I would say that those are some of, my key experiences,
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. So today we're here to have a real authentic conversation about the state of Black boys. And we know we've been seeing a lot of different injustices happening today, and it's not new. Unfortunately, we continue to hear these stories and have historically. So when you hear the phrase "the state of Black boys," what comes to mind for you both?
I mean, actually, I think oftentimes when it comes to Black boys, there's a kind of a narrative that gets put out there that, like, Black boys are just doing so bad and everything's horrible and all this kind of stuff. And, one of the things that I think about when I think about the state of Black boys is the state of the world, the state of our culture, the state of our society. And I think that often, the kind of circumstances and situation of a lot of Black boys reflects on the just the sick nature of our society, right? And that there are certain groups of people, of children, of students that are kind of seen as disposable, that are marginalized, and that don't get the support that they deserve. So for me, when I think about the state of Black boys, I really think about a lot of the ways in which our culture, our society, and in some cases, even our families are failing our boys.
Wow. Yeah, we're going to get into that in a little bit. Thank you for sharing that. Jordan.
Yeah, I mean, so kind of the same way you're talking about in the beginning, that I think the state of Black boys, I think of like Black Boy Joy, I think that was a powerful movement, right? And it's in my head now when I hear the phrase state of Black boys, I think about that. Just unabashed joy, having a good time, the creativity that's within Black people, within Black boys. The dawn of like the new jazz era. We got a lot of young brothers playing jazz right now. Alvin's nasty on the keys, by the way. I just want to put that out there. Alvin can play the keys.
That's an illusion.
But there's a lot of young creativity in a bunch of different spaces. I'm a big jazz head, so there's a lot of that right now, which is dominated by young Black people killing it across a bunch of different instruments. So that's something I think about. I think about the Black valedictorian at Princeton. First time in their 274-year history or whatever, where I went to grad school, they got a Black valedictorian. I mean, it's sad it's the first time, but it's amazing, right? Like that's part of the legacy, and that's part of the culture. So we got to think about that in this current time. And like what Alvin said as well, I also think about, the vicious disparities and then and the obstacles that Black boys face, whether it's because they're viewed as older than they are or viewed as a danger, just those things that we've all experienced as growing up as Black men. And I think about that and how difficult it can be sometimes too.
Absolutely. You said something really interesting, and we're gonna get, and it's important, but we're gonna get to this a little bit later. I just want to throw it out there for folks to think about. Hashtag Black Boy Joy, right? We also see hashtag Black Girl Magic. To all the women that are joining us, shout out to y'all for continuous support. And there's so much power in that, but I want to come back to that a little bit later on. So you guys talked about the work that you do. Briefly, we'll again tie into this a little bit later, but how did you decide on the career paths that you have chosen?
I feel like my career path kind of chose me in some ways. I mean, my mom taught in the Little Rock School District for more than 30 years, right? So I spent a significant portion of my summers putting up bulletin boards for classes that I had nothing to do with, right? So, right, child labor and all that. But I also got to witness on a daily basis my mom's passion, right? So she's at home grading papers. She's talking about students. She's talking about lessons that went well or stuff that was crazy. And I couldn't talk about my journey and my kind of path into education without acknowledging my mom. But I will say that I never thought I would go into education. My high school principal told me one day during my senior year, Alvin, you're going to be a better principal than I ever was. That's what he said to me. And I looked him right in his face and said, never. I will never go into education. Right? But, I think for me, in terms of the work that I do with Barbershop books, it really came down to me seeing a problem that wouldn't let me go. And I kind of haven't let it go. I was in a barbershop getting a haircut across the street from the school where I taught first grade in the Bronx. One of my students is just sitting there doing nothing. And I'm like, he should be reading. And it wasn't at that time, but, years later that I decided, that idea I had that one day, I think I want to try and make it happen. And that's kind of what I've been doing, ever since I started it.
Yeah, I would say I love barbershop books, but just real quick before I tell my piece, Alvin actually brought barbershop books to my barber. And so, I get to go into the barbershop, get a cut, and you get to see little kids reading next to their parents and next to somebody else in the community. And it's amazing to see. It's amazing to see. So shout out to Alvin for that. So I started my career in education as well. In college, I did a Big Brother, Big Sister. I also taught at after school program, and I was like, this is definitely the right path for me. And maybe I didn't realize this at the time, but when I was younger, my mom would tell me, she was one of 8 siblings, and she was the only one that graduated from college. And she talks about the reason that happened is because one teacher came to her and said, you could go to college. Like you could do this. You could apply for this scholarship. There's a scholarship right here you could apply for, and you could get in, and it wouldn't be that much money. And so she said before that, she was like, that wasn't really the thing I was thinking about. You know what I mean? And so that one action allowed, a transformation of her life, of my life, and like generations to come, right? And the fact that one individual can do that and the power that one individual had inspired me. I was like, I want to do that. I want to do that. So, yeah.
I love that. The one thing I want to mention about the work that you both are doing, and something that I think is just generally important to think about, is oftentimes when we think about the word educator, we associate that with just teacher. But I think that we're all educators, right, in many different ways. And whether you are coaching or being a parent or whatever career path you're in, there's so much knowledge that you can provide and hand to others where they can learn. And that right there is education, right? We don't always think of it in that way. But I love like what you're doing, right? So much conversation happens in barbershops. So much conversations, right?
Maybe not at this particular moment, but yes, there's certainly lots of conversations that happen. I mean, barbershops are cultural centers, and when I think about the state of Black boys, I really think about, where are the spaces where Black boys feel safe, right? When I remember, when I taught first grade and kindergarten and everything, one of the things that was really important to me was making sure that kids felt safe. And when I say safe, I'm not just talking about physically safe.
Yeah.
I'm also talking about emotionally safe, right? And I think about safe to take risks. I think about how important risk taking is to learning, and how there's so many children who they really just don't feel comfortable, because in some kids' lives, making a mistake may mean you get hurt, right? Literally, you get hurt. Or they've seen other people who've made mistakes and they've gotten hurt. And when I say they've gotten hurt, it can mean any number of things. But for me, I think creating a safe space for all children, but specifically a space for Black boys is so important. And barbershops certainly do that for Black males. But I think that, with the right type of approach and communication and support, any space can be a space that, supports Black boys.
You're hitting on so much. And I'm looking at the chats, which people are writing in some stuff that relates strongly to this conversation. So I just want to take a step back really quickly and travel back into our own childhood and our adolescent years. So thinking about what we're seeing today, and now coming back to reflect on our own childhoods. Shout out to Jim. Looks like you're back with us. Please let us know if you can hear us.
Yeah.
All right.
You might have to take yourself off mute. In the meantime, while he's figuring that out, the one question I do want to ask is, what are some of the challenges that you've experienced in your childhood, in your adolescent years? Jordan, let's start with you.
Yeah. I mean, Alvin might have a similar story too. He's from Little Rock. I'm from Kansas City, which, you know, the Midwest South has its challenges, right? Like, I grew up in what was kind of the sticks outside of Kansas City, you know, in a school that had a lot of racism, and so I, you know, experienced that growing up. You know, whether it's name calling, whether, you know, whatever, that was definitely a part of my childhood that was difficult. And that, you know, that line of thinking also led to, you know, maybe some of the best encounters with individuals or even with police officers, to be frank. You know what I mean? And I got pulled over all the time in Missouri, like all the time. Not part of that was like my car was kind of messed up, but like a lot of that wasn't necessarily just the car. Like I got pulled over all the time, so that, you know, that's just a reality. I mean, one way people ask like, what was Missouri like, and I'm like, Trump won the state by 19 points.
Yeah,
you know, that's all you really got to say. So, so if we're just talking about challenges, you know, that's the stuff that I would highlight. So yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. Alvin, talk to the people. What was that like for you?
I mean, you know, for those who know, they know. For those who don't, they don't. But in the early 90s in Little Rock, Arkansas, like let's say 90, I think 3. In 93, 92 or 93, Little Rock, Arkansas was the murder capital of the United States, like per capita. So the homicide rate was higher than New York, than LA, Chicago, any of that. And so, I mean, it was just gangs. I mean, in my neighborhood, it was a blood neighborhood. And so, you know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, you just had to think about color in a whole different way. You just had to, you know what I mean? You couldn't afford to just be out here reckless, walking through the wrong neighborhood. And this was Little Rock, Arkansas. This wasn't, you know, some big, huge city somewhere on the coast. But I would say that some of the major challenges for me just had to do with my lack of life experiences. You know, I had never been on a plane until my senior year when Grinnell College flew me out to visit. Right, I didn't have a driver's license till the end of my senior year. You know, I hadn't been out of the South until I went to run in the Junior Olympics in Virginia, where I saw the ocean for the first time. You know, and so I would say, like, I just didn't know a lot of stuff was possible. You know what I mean? And I think that for me, that was the biggest thing. It's like the ways in which my life experiences, my circumstances limited my realm of possibility. Now, I was fortunate enough, you know, kind of like Jordan's mom, to encounter people or to have experiences that expanded kind of my realm of possibility. But I think those were some, I mean, like, for example, nobody in my neighborhood that I knew read for fun. Yeah. Right. So I didn't read for fun. It wasn't that I necessarily hated reading. Okay, maybe I did, but but you know, it just wasn't a part of the culture. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Thank you for sharing that. Jim, can you hear us?
Do you can hear us, but we can't hear him.
Jim, if you want to, you can feel free to respond in the chat. I can read your responses. We can still make this work. You know what I'm saying?
All right.
That's what I'm saying. You know, so thinking about your personal experiences, the experiences of other Black boys and Black men in your communities, or just what you've seen, generally speaking, do you feel like we see some of those same challenges reflected in our Black boys today?
I mean, without a doubt.
Do we see racism? Is that what you're asking? If we see racism with black boys? I just want to make sure I'm understanding the question.
Yeah, I think that is a part of the question, right? Whether personally or systemically, what do we see? What have you seen growing up, and then what do we see today?
Well, I mean, I think lack of experiences is something that I think poverty in general, right, affects one's ability to have access to new and different types of experiences, but also the prejudice that black boys face. You know, there are probably black boys that would love to play golf, right? Like, for example, when I was in high school, I was put in a regular English class. I had to go to my counselor and be like, listen, it's been a whole semester of 10th grade English. All I've learned is that my teacher think OJ was innocent. I'm like, I feel like there might be more to this whole 10th grade English thing. Could you put me in another class? But that was me going to my counselor. By default, I just got put in regular. And so I think when I think about black boys, I think about what are the defaults in our institutions? What are the defaults in people's perceptions that kind of route black boys, you know, into certain paths, right? Mm-hmm. Or that creates barriers, right? Or obstacles for them, you know.
Yeah.
But racism, definitely. I think that's definitely out here.
And look, and we know, though, to your point, right, that racism is the root of all the inequities we experience, right? So we from a foundation, systemic racism then lends itself to oppression, right? Gender inequality, all these other different things that we experience, right? This notion of intersectionality, when we're thinking about the way in which our identities come together, right? And the impact that we experience often led from, or I would argue always led from, systemic racism.
Well, so, Jordan talked about the being pulled over by the police a lot. And, you know, one of the terms that I hear or phrases I hear all the time is the school to prison pipeline and that type of thing. I would love, Jordan, to hear your perspective. I know that you've done some work in helping previously incarcerated people and working with prisons and things like that. I would love to hear your perspective on like the state of black boys and as it relates to our prison system or our injustice system.
Yeah, there's a lot of thoughts on that, right? I mean, I can look at that in a bunch of different perspectives, but I think one thing that you see nationwide, you see it everywhere, is that black boys are suspended at much, much higher rates than their white counterparts, right? And so you see those racial disparities. You see it by school, and you see it, you know, at the individual level, and you see it by age too, right? You know, nationwide, there's not a ton of, you know, younger kids that are getting suspended, but the ones who are generally black and brown, right? And they're generally suspended a lot too if they are suspended at a young age, kind of kindergarten to second grade, and that has terrible impacts, right, on you know, the future of kids, right? If they believe that they're a problem at a young age, and they believe when they go to education they're viewed as a problem, they go, you know, to school, they're not going to want to go to school. And, you know, I mean, so you know, one of the things I'm kind of most proud of in my work in the city is, you know, we basically banned K through 2 suspensions. There are a very, very, very small number, you know, of K through 2 suspensions that do happen. And that was a result of a task force where we brought in a bunch of principals, we brought in people from the community-based organizations, we had students, and we had conversations about what can we do to change this paradigm. And one of the things the principals voted on, they were like, we should ban K through 3 suspensions. So I think that's an important piece of the puzzle of improving things. Also, curbing suspensions for insubordination is really important, right? So I mean, that's a really big question. I could talk about that for ages. I don't know what. Jason, you leave me. You tell me what to do right now, man. I'm happy to keep going.
Yeah. So it's funny because it's a nice segue into what I was going to follow up with, right? So we highlighted systemic issues, right? And we know that when we're referring to systemic issues, that these are things that historically have been intentionally created to keep people from moving, people of color, black people as well from moving forward, right? So I often wonder to myself, as we think about institutional racism, right, and all the inequities, what do you both feel is our role in helping to dismantle some of that? Now that's a loaded question, and I know oftentimes we may not even see that in our lifetime, right? But what do you think is our role in helping to lead in that direction?
It feels weird being on camera and touching my face because we're not supposed to touch our face, but I'm in the house, so I guess I could touch my face. I mean, my response to that is related to what Jordan just said, and I think it's the importance of people who look like us being involved when policy is getting developed. So Jordan was either a part of a task force or connected to a task force, or at least knew about the task force, and they were working out here looking at research, talking to principals, figuring out what can we do to address this, and they came together and decided on some policy. And so I feel like too often when it comes to issues of Black boys, organizations are out here trying to do their little bit, or people are out here speaking passionately and activists, and those are all important. But I feel like, when someone has to also be crafting policy that addresses some of these institutionalized, the institutionalized racism and other issues. And so for me, when I think about what we need to do, I'm thinking about what policies need to change. And that, I think the one about not suspending kids for insubordination. I mean, when I think about some of the curriculums, some of the lessons I've seen, your lessons are insubordinate to kids. Like, what are you doing? Why is you torturing these kids like this? Yeah. And then you want to get upset because they don't want to sit here and listen to you say some craziness. Like, you need to insubordinate yourself. I don't even know if that's a thing, but y'all feel what I'm saying.
Yeah, so real, so real. Jordan, do you want to add to that?
Man, I feel like we got to do everything we can, right? Like, that's kind of the purpose of working in government. If you see yourself as a public servant, or you see yourself as someone in direct service, that's the whole purpose of your work, right? That's literally the purpose of why am I, which is why I'm like happy to have this job, is it was literally built to do that, right? And so to the extent that can be done within the city, right? I believe in the continuum of supports. And to Alvin's point, coalitions, I think, are the real key to solving big systemic problems, right? Whether that's a coalition that's a task force that's in city government, whether that's a coalition of people across the spectrum, direct service, community-based organizations, obviously educators, those bodies that tap into the people on the ground, that tap into the people that have lived experience, understand the actual issues, have a lot more juice and a lot more power to do the paradigm shift that we need. And so kind of on that train of thought, one of the mantras that I really like are people closest to the problem are closest to the solution, right? That was true for criminal justice reform. That's true for education reform. Right? If you're a teacher, you know the nuances of stuff that people sitting behind a desk may not know unless they taught previously, right? And so, and even if they taught previously, like I have, when thinking about policy or thinking about different initiatives, you need to call the people that are still on the ground and say, hey, does this make sense? Like, does this actually work for you right now? And so ensuring that you have those advisors and that coalition of people who will also be willing to push, because bureaucracy and there's a status quo bias on everything, right? And you always have the more conservative forces out there in the worlds of the New York Post and all that great literature out there. And so, but so to have the people on the ground that support the idea that we're part of fomenting the policy or the initiative gives you the ability to move forward in the face of potential, negative reactions.
For sure. You guys are hitting on so many important things, and I hope people are writing this down, because essentially what you're hinting at is strategy, right? It's so many of us have so many questions about this, and we may want to know, well, how can we tackle policy? We feel like we're so far away from what's happening, but how do we learn about the committees, the coalitions, get involved with our community boards in our communities, right? Alvin, looks like you wanted to say something really quickly.
Yeah, I mean, what I was thinking about as Jordan was talking about the importance of coalitions is just the role that humility plays in a lot of the work, right? A coalition is about, you being able to contribute to some greater good, which means you may not do everything, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that, when I think about what Black boys need, a big part of it is some groups or people making the decision to say, you know what, I may not be the best person for this particular thing, but I still want to support it, or I want to support the organization that is the right. Here's an example, right? So one of our funders came to us and said, hey, we read this article in the Times that said, or some magazine or news article saying that Black barbershops aren't applying for the COVID relief funds for small businesses. And we want your Black barbershops to stay open so you can continue doing your work. Can you all create a webinar for Black barbers so that they know? And I was like, well, I don't think I'm qualified to be advising, small business owners, on these particulars of these new, funding opportunities that are coming out. But I was like, we can absolutely do a webinar, and I can find someone who would be the right fit to facilitate that conversation. And that's what we did. We had a small business consultant facilitate a webinar where she went funding opportunity by funding opportunity and talked about which ones are for barbershop owners, which ones are for barbers. And she did an excellent job. But I didn't just tell my funder, no, we can't do that. I'm not the right person. I said, okay, let me try and be a facilitator. Another example of that is that every summer, Barbershop Books gives away over $25,000 worth of brand new books right over at the Boys Club of New York. Now, we canceled for this year, but we still wanted to get books into kids' hands, but schools are closed, camps are closed, everything's closed right now. So what we did is we reached out to our community partners in Columbus, Ohio, in Detroit, in Wilmington, Delaware, and all these different places. We said, hey, would you be interested in connecting us with local food distribution sites that are giving lunch and snacks to parents for their kids? And they were like, sure. And so now we're going to be able to give out, thousands of books through our partners who have direct connections. So I think just finding way and just being willing to say, you know what, I may not be the organization, or I can't do everything. Let me figure out who else, my role, and I don't want everybody, after what I said earlier, to think, oh, you have to do policy. I don't do policy. I put children's books in local barbershops and provide barbers with very practical tips and strategies on how they can inspire, children to read. That's it. So that, I don't want people to feel like they have to do one thing or all things, find your thing.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And thank you both for sharing that, right? Because there are several ways we can look at this. One is from a policy level, right, that Jordan was talking about. Another is from a community level, being on the ground and also thinking about like what's missing and what is my role in helping to bridge these gaps that may exist in certain communities, right? And so I think it's important to think about when we achieve success, whatever that means to us, when we find a level of access and we're able to learn more about what's happening outside of our communities, how do we then bring those resources back, right, to our communities? And so I think about oftentimes
hire Harlem.
Word.
Right? I think oftentimes we have to think about that because sometimes we hear a different narrative. I know for myself, growing up in the South Bronx, I was always taught to leave the community, like don't come back. And we just had a really great conversation about this, me and my co-producer and somebody else on our show about this narrative that's sometimes created that pushes us out, but never tells us to come back to then get the next Alvin, the next Jordan, the next Jim, right? The next Jeff. And all of these people are doing amazing work. And so how do we continue to think about ways to bridge these gaps? Because it doesn't have to be on such a large scale. It can start with one person. So I love that you guys are sharing this. I want to transition into some individualized questions really quickly that I have for both of you. And I want to start with you, Jordan. Jordan, as an educator and a leader in a lot of the work and the efforts that we're seeing today, where have you seen success with Black boys and Black men?
Man, in so many different things. One of my favorite initiatives is the Cure Violence work, where we hire people that have been in the community, people with lived experience, people that understand the neighborhoods. We pay them to reduce the likelihood of violence, right? So I think that's the future of justice reform completely. It's to hire people from the community. It provides a community job. It provides mental health training. It provides a ton of skills for the individuals that are the credible messengers. And then they're literally able to stop violence from occurring, or they're able to spread good information. So right now, we've got the credible messengers are spreading awareness about social distancing, right? And the importance of that, and passing out PPE. And so that initiative has been really successful, and it's been studied, and it's been shown to reduce crime, right? I think in the past, there was always the conception that to reduce crime, the way you do that is to hire more and more police. But no, there is an alternative, and it's to hire people from the community, right, to support the community. And we're seeing that's really successful in New York City, right? And then the credible messengers also mentor kids, right? So that's the Arches, the Next Steps. There's a bunch of different organizations in Harlem. You got Street Corner Resources, you got Exodus in East Harlem. And so those organizations, they not only mentor the youth, but they stop violence from occurring. They stop retaliatory violence from occurring, right? They show up to the scene when violence does occur and say, hey, we got to make sure nothing else occurs here, right? So that kind of stuff, you have to be in the community, you have to know the community, you have to have trust for the community to be able to do that work. So that's something I think that's super successful on a policy and a programmatic level. I think a lot of the school climate reform that we've done in this administration has been really powerful. The basic banning of K-2 suspensions, curbing insubordination suspensions, where you have to have a really high-level person approve it. That's really significantly dropped suspensions, and it's dropped disparities. Disparities still exist, and they're still great. Let's be 100% real here, but they're not as bad as they were, which is important, right? That to acknowledge success, I think, is important because it gives us inspiration to keep on moving. What else has been really successful? I think raise the age has been really successful, right? So that's an important policy change that occurred in the criminal justice side. New York State was one of 2 states in the entire country, us in North Carolina, that automatically charged every single 16-year-old who allegedly committed a crime as an adult. As an adult, they went to adult court, to adult jail at Rikers at 16, right? Progressive states like Mississippi figured out a better solution before us, right? That was also a joke. No one's in here, but but the point is that policy change, which a lot of people were afraid of, occurred, and everything's been fine. Crime hasn't shot up, right? We've actually reduced the number of kids who are detained or who are in detention since we passed that statewide policy, right? And so there's less. And the point of that is there's less Black and brown kids in juvenile detention homes because of that policy. There's less Black and brown kids, going obviously in adult court, being treated like adults through the system, which we know is wrong. So those are some successful policies I've got to be a part of, that I've got to work on, that I think are inspiring and important.
I think
I want to be clear though. There's a lot to do. So those are pieces of the puzzle,
Yeah.
Can I share some successes as well? I know you have a question that's specific to me.
Yeah, for
but
sure.
I would love to just talk about some things that I've seen that have been successful. So one thing is responding to what children actually want or are interested in. And I'm not talking about parents being their kids' best friends, but as it relates to reading and learning, I'm talking about teachers, parents, educators, principals, whoever, taking the time to actually ask kids, what are you most interested in? What are the things that you like? And then trying to actually create educational experiences or curriculum that incorporate their interests, right? So, I have people all the time who are like, yo, why you got to get more Black books in your barbershop books, man. These kids need to know their history. And I'm like, you're right. Kids do need to know their history. But we asked Black boys what they wanted to read, and they told us Captain Underpants and Diary of a Wimpy Kid. So actually, it ain't even about what I think necessarily is the best. You know, I ask kids, and so I think too often when decisions are being made, kids aren't consulted. They aren't even observing the kids to try and see what they might like. And so I feel like that's something I've seen to be successful. When people actually take the time to learn about children, learn about parents, learn about communities, and to try and create experiences that not only involve them, but incorporate them into the actual curriculum. I think that that's something that I've seen to be successful. Also, expanding kids' realm of possibility. Yes. Create, whether it's internships, whether it's, you know, some type of cultural experiences like music. So here's an example of, now, I shouldn't even be talking about this because I don't even know how it's going to turn out. But tomorrow, I have a 3-time Grammy winning jazz saxophonist who's going to participate in a read aloud with me. I'm reading a book about a children's book about John Coltrane. Right? Barbershop Books, we do a little live, Facebook Live read aloud. And I said, you know what? I know too many jazz musicians just to be reading this children's book about John Coltrane. And so Tavon Petticott, who is the saxophonist for Gregory Porter, he's gonna participate in the read aloud while I'm reading this book. He gonna do some stuff, and then I'm gonna give him but like, I'm literally thinking about what could I do to make this book about John Coltrane, who most kids may not know. But guess what? Kids who love to dance, who love music, they gonna fall up in that groove pocket, right? And they might get curious, you know. So for me, it's not about liking everything. And I think that for too many kids, they think that in order for them to do something, they gotta like it. But I think we need to start giving kids more freedom to just try. And I think that's the dangerous thing that Black boys face, is this inability to be different, to try something new, to make mistakes. Black boys don't get to make mistakes because they get expelled, right? Whereas everybody else get to make mistake after mistake. They get to say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, and they have somebody there to comfort them, to support them, to say, you know what, let's talk about it, instead of saying you're a bad child, you're a bad student, get out of here. And so I think those are some of the things that I've seen to be successful, is creating opportunities for kids to learn new and different things that take them out of what they might ordinarily know, and in a way that makes them feel safe and not stupid.
I love that. I want to stay with you for a quick second, Alvin, because related to a lot of this, and connecting it back to some of the institutional stuff we said, you mentioned something really important in your TED Talk. Right. And for those of you who don't know, Alvin Irby has a really dope TED Talk where he's talking a lot about what you're hearing now and the importance of reading. And in that TED Talk, you talk a little bit about cultural competence. And so I think what's so dope about the different hats that you wear and how your identities all come together is that you have this amazing gift to be able to read an audience, understand an audience, and understand the environment in which you occupy. And so in your TED Talk, you define cultural competence as the ability to translate what you want someone else to know or be able to do into communication or experiences that they find relevant or engaging. Can you talk to us a little bit about cultural competence and what you mean by that?
Yeah, so, a lot of times when people talk about cultural competency or cultural responsiveness, a lot of times people are thinking about race and ethnicity and language, if we're being honest. And so for me, one of the things that I have learned is that cultural competency is actually required for any type of interaction between humans. Just saying hello, you got to know what gesture in a particular culture means hello. And that's just to say hello. If you actually want to teach someone something, if you want to change their behavior or, develop some new habit, well, that requires a significantly higher level of cultural competency. And the reality is that everybody doesn't have it, and everybody doesn't have it for everybody. Just because you know how to talk to this one person doesn't mean you know how to talk to this person. And just because you know how to talk to a child doesn't mean you may necessarily know what's the best approach to say to parents. And so, I guess when I think about cultural competency, it really is about, again, humility and the recognition that you may not have or know everything that you need to know in order to make a certain experience as relevant or as engaging as it could be. And so as I think about the work that I do with barbershops and with barbers, I don't know, there may be another nonprofit, but I know that Barbershop Books is one of the only nonprofits in the country that provides a 90-minute early literacy workshop to barbers. These are people, they're not teachers. We're not trying to turn them into teachers. And so as we think about, well, what are you going to say to a barber whose primary focus is cutting hair and making money? What are you going to say to them to get them inspired and to make them feel empowered to be able to have conversations with parents and children about reading? And so I go to stories, right? I tell them a story. I ask the barbers, how many of you growing up got to talk before you went out in public or into a store or restaurant? Y'all know the talk I'm talking about. We about to go in this store. Don't ask for nothing. Don't touch nothing. Don't embarrass me. Look, Jordan is having a flashback. Did I trigger you, Jordan? Right. But I know how to preface this conversation. So then why am I telling them this? They all finish the sentence before I can finish it. And they say, yeah, we had to talk. And I was like, well, guess what? A lot of the little boys who are coming into your barbershop had the exact same talk. So do not assume that just because there's this colorful, child-friendly bookshelf sitting here with fun books in it, that kids are going to automatically go over and engage with it. Invite parents. Say, hey, while you're waiting, feel free. See, I could have just said to them, hey, you need to make sure you talk to kids, make sure you talk to parents. But I knew I needed to kind of contextualize it. And so I do that by starting with a story that they can relate to, right? I want the barbers to know, even if a kid is 1 or 2, they should still tell those parents, those kids should read, right? But I don't just tell them that. I say, you know what? I had a little nephew who didn't want to read while I was reading with him. After 2 minutes, he just got up in the middle of my read aloud, and my nephew walked away. He was like, no, I'm good on the rest of this book. But the next morning, at way too early in the morning, he's knocking on my door saying, Uncle Alvy, read the book. And I'm like, what book? Go get the book you want me to read. He goes over, picks out the book that the day before he walked away from, and not only sat there to listen to me read it once, but he listened to me read it 3 times back to back. And so I told these barbers, not every kid who comes into the shop is going to want to read. They're not going to want to read every time. They got reading trauma. Some of them have been made fun of, so don't expect it to happen. But guess what? If you provide a positive reading experience for them, you talk to them about books, you talk to them about how you like books, you can still have a positive impact. So,
yeah, Alvin, when you were talking, one of the things I thought about, and one of the reasons why I love Barbershop Books so much, is it gives people the resources to be part of that village, right? To be the part of that, part of that coalition of supports. We were talking about coalition building earlier, right? And so if at different facets and points of your life, you have supports for reading, you have supports for, job training skills, you have whatever, that builds the village that we need to really support our community. And it ties us all together in a way that allows for those coalitions to mount and foment the kind of systemic change that we're all hoping for, right? And so and on that point, I want to just give a shout out to New York City Men Teach, because that's one of the YMI funds and
I work for it.
Yeah, Jason, the leader for New York City Men Teach, and it does exactly that, right? It brings more men of color into the classroom, trains more men of color, then creates a village of support for those teachers, for the young men of color teachers, so that they can be the best teachers they can be, but also so that they have the mentorship and they have the people they can reach out to for advice to sustain them in that career, right? So that over time we actually have more men of color in the teaching force, right? So that's a lot of the work that Jason leads, and it's beautiful to see, because we know the young Black boys need to see themselves in their teachers. They need to see themselves in their educators, right? They need to see
expanding their realm of possibility. Yep.
Yeah, I love where you guys are going with this, and we have two more quick questions before we open it up for Q&A. Jordan, I want to stay with you because you were just talking about this, but also you started your introduction with this, right? And that was hashtag Black Boy Joy. And so if you aren't aware of this book, I recommend it for everyone. But Dr. Bettina Love, who's a professor at Georgia State, wrote an amazing book called "We Want to Do More Than Survive." And in that book, she has a whole chapter where she talks about hashtags that Black students, and particularly in Black folks, utilize and we've seen a movement around in the last few years, which are both Black Boy Joy, Black Girl Magic, and a few others, right? And in that, it's this emphasis to maintain your happiness and find that happiness through the struggle, right? We go back to the beauty in the struggle. And so how have you all maintained your happiness despite many of the inequities we see, despite some of the challenges you may see? What does that look like for you?
Yeah. I guess so. For me, I'm a perpetual optimist, and I feel like I just made that decision. It makes me happy to think about things optimistically, and so I try to find, for better or worse, the half full concept in my mind. I try to see that, or try to see what we can do to improve the situation despite the challenges, right? So in that way, I think I have a really, utilitarian framework. It's like, okay, there's a lot of stuff that's wrong here, but what can we do to make more, the most good with this given situation? And I think that's an important piece of government. And, thing that I think through is we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? Now, we don't want to do just technocratic changes all day because that's not going to get us where we want to be. And that's why we got to have that continuum of support. But from my perspective, it's important for me to see what can we do given this time, given the circumstances, to make the best out of the situation. The other thing, it sounds like that question was a little bit about self-care too, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So self-care is just super, super important. I like to meditate. That's something that's really helpful for me. I think it's kind of a growing movement and something that I got put on that was really helpful. I like to play music. I think that's really helpful. Learn about music. And then one thing I was just say, and that just kind of ties to your question, I'm not totally sure, but that was really helpful, I think, for my career, was I got coffee with someone new every week since I started in administration. And so I met so many people through that were really important for my career, right? Like going up to people and asking them, even if they were more senior, even if they were busy, like, yo, can we sit down? Can we build? Can I learn from you? And I've met a ton of people. And I think, in government and like every other job, having those people that and that you can build with allows you to create those coalitions sometimes that you need to make things move. So, yeah, that's been really good for me.
Yes.
What was the question again? Could you just?
Yeah, I went everywhere, bro. My fault.
Thinking about
no, don't apologize for being brilliant and articulate. Live your life.
Just thinking about happiness, right? So we spoke about the hashtag of Black Joy.
Right. So for me, I'm a stand-up comedian, right? So I think that in some ways I may even have a different relationship with the idea of joy and happiness than other people. Like I literally for the last 11 years have gotten on a stage every single month except for the last 2. And like with the intention of eliciting laughter, right? But for me, I think part of how I find joy in the struggle is by surrounding myself with people who will remind me and who do remind me of the wins. Because to be honest with you, as an entrepreneur, as a founder, I'm thinking I'm way up here and I'm looking at where I want to be 5 and 10 years from now. And so, I'm not always pausing to think about, we really just got a $238,000 grant from the William Penn Foundation to expand into 70 barbershops in Philadelphia.
Wow.
They're going to fund a $100,000 impact study of the Barbershop Books program. I have no idea what the Barbershop Books program is going to look like in the current moment, where, things are looking. But the fact that a foundation said, you know what, we believe so much in what you're trying to do that we not only want to help you expand, but we want to fund an evaluation and an impact study. Like, I still don't think I've really taken time to really let that marinate. But I think surrounding myself with people who will stop me and say, no, Alvin, no, you need to stop and recognize this is monumental and it's really amazing, and it's okay to stop and pause. And so I think to who you surround yourself with, the fact that when they told me, hey, we want to put together this panel, I could say, oh, do you know Jordan? Have you spoke to Jordan? He should be a part of this conversation. And I think, whether or not you speak to people every day, making sure that at the end of the day, because we're not perfect, nobody's perfect, but to make sure that you're moving through life in a way that people respect you and respect the work that you do, and that you respect the work that you do, and I think for me, the little things, out of all the stuff that I've done in my life, and I've run 3 marathons, right? I've climbed Machu Picchu. One of the things that gives me the most joy is when I pop into a barbershop randomly and I see a little boy just sitting there reading, or a grandmother or a mother just sitting there reading, not because cameras are around, not even because somebody else told them to, but because this now is what they do when they come to the barbershop. And to have been a part of helping to make that happen, and it wasn't just me. There's a team of people. There are barbers, there's publishers, all kind of people that have helped make it possible. But to have been a part of helping to help expand that kid's realm of possibility, for me, that gives me some of the greatest joy and purpose and fulfillment of anything I've ever done.
Amazing. Thank you both for sharing that. I just have one last question, and we'll turn it over to Q&A because we're about to hit our time. And I had 2 questions, but I'm going to tie them together. And if you can just try to keep them brief, so that we can turn it over to the audience. And so what we know, and those of us who aren't familiar with Alvin, Jordan, or even Jim, who had some technical issues, right, is that these folks are trailblazers in the work that they do, right? They're doing some really amazing work. And one question that I sometimes think about in thinking about modeling excellence is, how do we move from being good to being great, right? You guys aren't just in the position you're in for no reason, right? I'm sure you were good, but there was something that continues to take you up to the next level that I think is important to highlight. And I think tied to that, what advice can you give to other Black boys and Black men who are listening? Jordan, we'll start with you.
Man, I'm still trying to figure that out in some ways, right? Like, life is about perpetually growing, and I think if you have that educator mindset for yourself, that's really important. I think a lot of things that I've done that I think have been helpful in my career, just in general, just putting in routines. Like, routines are just super, super important. Whether that routine is this is going to sound super bureaucratic, but having a way to track all the stuff you're supposed to do. That's really important, right? And as especially in government, as you have a lot of incoming, making sure that you have a way to track that. For my team, it's definitely elevating their leadership, right? Making sure that the people that you're working with know that they're valued and that they're working. It's about collaborating across sectors, in and outside of government, to make things happen. And honestly, the coffee stuff is real. I'm gonna be honest with you. Just walking up to people and talking to them and asking if you can, go down and sit down and build has been hugely important. That's how I got my first job at the mayor's office. I was at a panel at grad school, and this dude was speaking about Indian mass incarceration. He was on fire, and I was like, I gotta meet this guy. And so I went up to him afterward. I was like, hey man, you need an intern? You need an intern? And he was like, actually, I do need an intern. So I started interning for him, and he became a mentor of mine and kind of showed me the ropes in city government. And then for this job, I actually saw Deputy Mayor Thompson speak on a panel too, and he was killing it. He was like by far the most radical, intelligent person I've ever seen in a role like that. Like, the things he was saying, I was like, the Deputy Mayor can say that? I was really impressed. And so I was like, okay, let me go up to him and ask him. I was like, yo, can we sit down? And to my surprise, he was like, yeah. And, you know, so we sat down, we got to chop it up. And then when, you know, this position rolls around, it's, you know somebody, right? And so you can kind of build on that. So I would say, you know, those are things I think that are really helpful for me. And then I read mantras in the morning, man. I think that's really helpful. Like I got a list of mantras that help focus me and direct me for the day and help you get through some of the tough times that can come with any job. So, you know, that's been really good for me.
What's one of those mantras?
Oh man, which one?
Can you share one? Can you share one?
Yeah,
like you, Jordan. I need to get a routine. I need to get a mantra.
The first one is try not to become a man of success, but try to become a person of value. Right? There's a difference between being successful and being valuable, right? And so that first one is to get my ego in check. Don't be out here with a crazy ego. Be about the work. I like 20 years from now. Well, no, let me not do that one. There's a bunch of them. I don't know if I want to go through this, but there's a few of them. Yeah. You want me to go?
That's dope. I like that.
Alvin, if you could just briefly chime in as well. So thinking about what it means to go from good to great, and also advice for Black boys and Black men that may be listening.
Well, connected to what Jordan said, like, I don't know if people really understand what it takes to believe in yourself enough to go and ask somebody you don't know and who you perceive to be at a much higher level than you to have coffee. Like a lot of people don't even want to sit down with someone because they're afraid they might look stupid or say the wrong thing. And so I think, you know, not getting rid of the imposter syndrome is there. But I think acting in spite of the imposter syndrome, and not stopping, right? Like acting in spite of. So that's one thing I would say. It don't matter if you don't think you're good enough. Do it anyway. Apply anyway. Ask them to have coffee anyway. Another thing that I would say is try the asparagus. And when I say asparagus, I really use that as a metaphor for all the new and different experiences that you might either encounter or have an opportunity to encounter. A lot of people in life, you know, especially adults, but children too, will not try something they don't think they're going to like. They just won't. They're like, nope, I don't do that. I don't like that. I went, sometimes it's not even about the thing. You might sit next to somebody that's going to help you to help your friend get on, right? I was sitting at a jazz concert, struck up a conversation. The guy sitting next to me did sound for Spike Lee. I have nothing to do with movie sound, but I was talking to someone I knew, and she said, I've been trying to get into this sound union for forever. I was like, for like television and movies? I was like, yo, I know this dude. She not only got into the sound union, but Spike Lee personally asked for her after she had worked on a project with this guy. I made an introduction. Sometimes it's not about whether or not you like something. Now, I'm not telling anybody to go out and try crack. That's not what I'm saying. You know, I'm saying try stuff that's healthy and constructive, you know what I mean? But those are some of, I would say, some of the major things that can take people from being good to being great. And another thing that I think has been important for me is being willing to listen to yourself and to respect your muse. You know, as an artist, as a comedian, I write everything down, right? There's stuff I might never say, but I write it down in my notes. So I want to tell anybody out there, respect your ideas enough, because a lot of people don't believe in their ideas. And so they just say, if it's good, I'll remember it. Respect yourself, respect your ideas enough to write them down. Because, listen, I had the idea for Barbershop Books my first year teaching back in 2008, 2009. I didn't actually found an organization until 2013. Why is it that I remembered? I wrote it down. I wrote a half page about this idea and then emailed it to myself. And then several years later, I said, you know, that idea I had, I think I want to try and make it happen. So I'm gonna stop there.
Yeah, thank you for all the gems. You guys are dropping so much knowledge, and I know I've taken away a lot of what you said, right? So to wrap up some of those messages, networking is huge, right? Grab coffee with that person you want to learn from. I do that a lot myself too, and it's huge. And all I ask for is just knowledge. Tell me how you got there. I'm gonna write down these notes, and we're gonna move forward. Right? Believing in yourself. Taking a step forward in with the idea that you might think is stupid or you really want to do, but you're nervous, right? Like making sure you take that leap of faith and believing in yourself. Mentorship, right? Mentorship is big. How do we find mentors, and how do we offer mentorship? You know, having a village of support.
Be somebody that other people want to be around. That's also important, because you could be brilliant, but if nobody wants to talk to you.
Exactly. Model excellence too, right? And also that point, right? As you said it, be somebody that others want to be around. So I want to say thank you. And before we close out, I just want to, we have a few minutes for questions. And so what I'll do is as people are you can type in your questions. I'll read them, and I'll just direct one question to each panelist. So Jordan, you'll answer one question. Alvin, you'll answer one question just because of time. So folks who have questions, feel free to just type it on in. Shout out to Jeff who said we're doing a great job. Shout out to y'all guys to you guys for everything you're doing, and Jeff for creating this space, as well as David for making sure all of this can happen.
Oh, people wanted our IG handles. All right, I'm writing. I'm typing mine in.
Yeah, we could type it in, and we can also share it after anyone has any questions, like right before we wrap up.
Sure.
So feel free to do either too.
Yeah, I can put mine in here.
So we have a question. What action step can you recommend for parents to help with their son's learning? Jordan, I'll turn that question over to you.
Wait, action steps so you can do what? Say it again.
What action step can you recommend for parents to help with their son's learning?
I mean, that's an interesting question. I feel like Alvin would be super qualified. Jason, I feel like you're super qualified to answer that question. I mean, I'm not teaching now, but I say there's a bunch of programs. So depending on the age. So one of the programs we have is Reading Rescue. So it's a first grade reading intervention program to help kids stay on grade level at a young age, so they're not behind when they get older, right? So that's an important program. We got peer-to-peer mentoring, which trains students to be literally mentors for their younger peers, right? We know near-to-peer mentoring is really, really important for kids to be successful. So, and it's actually the best voice, right? When someone's a little bit older than you, you look up to them, and they can kind of show you the game and show you how to be successful in a certain space, right? So that's the initiative that we have. That was kind of my thoughts off the top of my head, and I'll think about some other stuff, but I think y'all can answer that too, for real. I'll say one other thing.
Yeah,
there's a bunch of videos doing this work too. There's a bunch of in Harlem, Brotherhood, Sister Soul. They have an amazing program with culturally relevant education where people can learn about their history, which is naturally empowering, right? But when you learn about your own greatness, your own Black excellence, maybe you want to read more because you're like, man, I feel good about myself when I read this, right? So bringing in literature that allows people to build their own self-esteem and build their own culture and knowledge is definitely a way to do that.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. I want to get to this next question from a high school senior. Raphael, shout out to you for joining us today. So his question is, given our current situation with the pandemic, as a high school senior, do you have any tips on how he can start networking? So now we're in a virtual space. And
I think,
if you want to jump in.
I think something that people appreciate when they're approached is, one, that you've done research, right? So like that there's intention. You don't always have to know everything about who somebody is, but even if you just look at their LinkedIn, even if you just read an article that they've written, people appreciate that, and it gives you a starting place, a talking point, right? Another thing I would say about that could help with networking is have a question, like a legitimate question, something that you want to know about. And the question could be as simple as, how did you get to where you are? But I think, people appreciate genuine interest in the work that they do or who they are or whatever. So I would say that those are great kind of, kind of starting places for, here's whoever that is, you should read the book, Never Eat Alone. Read the book, Never Eat Alone. And in that book, it talks about how oftentimes, or at least the way he frames it, that real networking, the networking that can change your life, is often about how you can help others, and not just about how what someone can do for you. So you should think about, how can I be helpful to other people? That woman who ended up getting in the sound union and working on films with Spike Lee, randomly, she connected me with a TV producer who was looking to put a reading space in a barbershop scene. And I was like, oh, yeah, we can put a little barbershop. Well, I was like, wait. What happens in this barbershop in this show? And she's like, well, people get murdered. I was like, well, hold up. I was like, hold up. Let's just put a bookshelf, but let's not put our name on it. Let's just to promote the reading. Just let's not have our name in the barbershop where the people get murdered in the show. But she thought of me when somebody had come up,
Hey, Robert, I would say the fact that you're on this and you asked that question and you're a senior in high school, you're already killing the game. You're already ahead of things, right? You're thinking through that, thinking about how to navigate. I definitely wasn't thinking about that in high school. So that's really impressive, and just keep on moving with that. I would say join some programs, man. I'm sure you're already in some programs. But one of the great things about New York City that not necessarily exists everywhere else, is that there's so many programs that kids can join where they can build with other, young people can join, where they can build with their peers, where they can learn about a bunch of things. And so take advantage of that. That's something beautiful that's, New York specific in some ways. There's a lot of places.
Where can you find information about those programs?
All right, so there's a couple different ways. I mean, we got a newsletter, a listserv where we talk about our programs. And so please send us your email. I think I put my information down in there, but I'll put my email too. Send me your information. We'll add you to our listserv so you can learn more about our programming. And then, if you reach out, I'm happy to connect you with other community-based organizations that may be doing something you're interested in.
Fellas, with that, I just want to thank you both again for joining us, and also thank our audience. Despite the technical difficulties in the beginning, you were here with us. I want to thank the Gentleman's Factory for creating this space. Jeff Linder, all the work that you're doing, David, all the support on the tech end, and just creating this platform, because these conversations are really important. I think especially where we are today, the state of Black boys is important to continue to think about, and think about how we can continue to build with each other, support each other, spread positivity and optimism. And so, fellas, again, I can't thank you enough for having this conversation with us. And I love your energy. I love all the work that you're doing. And how can folks learn more about you or get in contact with you? So I see Alvin, you're dropping your info.
Yeah, I put my email down there. Feel free to hit me up. I also put down my Instagram, the New York City Men Teach Instagram. Follow us on Instagram. Follow us on Twitter. We shoot out a lot of information that way. So especially related to COVID. So, we are funding some food banks, funding food distribution, PPE distribution. So that kind of information we're shooting out on our social media. So please follow us. We also, when New York City Men Teach has events, we push that out. So just follow us, so we can put you in the community so you know what's going down. And then I'm going to drop the email for the Young Men's Initiative email too in here. Just let me pull that up. Yeah.
Yeah, I also just included my IG and the NYC Men Teach IG as well. So you can either reach out to myself, reach out to NYC Men Teach. We have high school programs, college programs. Obviously, our biggest target, I shouldn't say target, our biggest focus is with teachers, right? And so we have community-based organization pipeline programs. So feel free to reach out. We can help to connect with some of those things as well. So fellas, with that, thanks again. And shout out to everyone who's been here throughout this entire time. It's almost been about an hour and a half. I don't know if you realize that, and everyone has stayed in tune. And I love the engagement throughout the chat. Networking is huge. I love people responding to each other. So let's continue to build. Let's continue to push this forward.
Yeah, definitely. Love y'all. Appreciate that.
Alvin, I think you're on mute.
Hey, we're just thankful that the technical difficulties occurred at the end. You know what I mean? We got to hear you this whole time, man. So we appreciate that.
We're here. Absolutely. So thank you with all that. Y'all be safe. Please continue to be safe. Think about self-care and hopefully we'll connect soon at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. Peace, y'all. Thanks for joining.